Hey guys, Umar here and welcome to the final video in our Spotify to Apple Music series. In this video, we will be deploying our application that transfers playlists from Spotify to Apple Music to the internet for everyone to use. Without further delay, let's get started. In the previous videos, we created our developer accounts, created our authentication server, created the client React app and the pages for the application, wrote the code logic that fetched the playlist from Spotify to Apple Music, and now in the final video, we'll be deploying our application for everyone on the internet to use. That's a lot of videos. Links to previous videos are above and in the description below. All the code for the project is on my GitHub page as well. If you want to make changes to the application, feel free to fork the repo and open a pull request. I have documented the code as much as possible. Speaking of changes, I made a few to the application offline since we last worked on it. I implemented a better searching strategy that searches for the songs on Apple Music using the name of the song and the name of the artist. If we don't find the results we're looking for, we then search using the name of the artist and the name of the song. This may seem like a little change, but it makes a big difference in helping us find more songs. I also added descriptive messages to the home page and to other parts of the application. All the code for this is down in the description. Let's talk about deploying our application. The general idea behind deploying an application is simple. You see, when you start developing an application, all the code for that application is on your computer, on your local machine. For development purposes, the code is being hosted on your computer, meaning your computer is used as a server to host the code for the application. You can access it using localhost followed by the port number or the IP address 127.0.0.1 followed by the same port number. 127.0.0.1 is a loopback IP address that establishes a connection with the same machine being used as the end user, in this case your computer. It basically means your computer is establishing a connection with itself. This IP address is usually referred to as localhost because, as I mentioned earlier, you are hosting the code on your local machine. Similarly, someone on the same network as you, meaning someone using the same Wi-Fi as you, can access the project using your machine's private IP address and the port. Now, deploying the project simply means we're taking the code from our local computer and moving it to a server where everyone else can access it. We can try to make our local computer the server that everyone can access, but that poses a lot of problems and we will run into complications really fast. If we choose to go this route, we might run into some security complications and some network issues as well. Instead, we can rent a server space from one of the many providers out there without necessarily buying an actual server. We simply upload our build, which is the production-ready version of our code, to the platform, and the platform handles the rest. A lot of these platforms usually have a pay-as-you-go policy, starting off at the free tier for personal projects and pay as you need or as your project gets bigger. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Heroku, Oracle are some of the popular providers out there, but there's so many more you can choose from. For our project, we will be deploying our application on Microsoft Azure. I chose to use Azure because of the simplicity and how it works with Visual Studio Code. After configuring your Azure account, you can deploy your code to Azure with just a click of a button from the VS Code text editor, which is my preferred text editor. I have also been using Azure at work, so I'm pretty familiar with how things work over there. I also think Azure is more user-friendly to beginners, and if you sign up, you can get 12 months free of using the services. Let's jump into the process of deploying the code. Before we start, make sure you have Visual Studio Code installed on your computer. Open a browser and navigate to azure.microsoft.com. If you have an account, click on Portal. This will redirect you to the Azure portal. If you don't, you can click on Try Azure for free, then click on Start Free. It'll take you through the process of signing up for a Microsoft account and using Azure. When you're done with either of these processes, you will end up with a page that looks like this. This page shows you all the resources that are available to you. There are app services, virtual machines, storage accounts, and more. They all have different functions depending on what you're looking for. In our case, we want to deploy a web application, so we'll click on App Services. There are 2 app services here from my previous attempts at deploying, but we'll be creating a new one to go through the process. Click on New. The first thing is your subscription. This will already be pre-selected and it basically just means your subscription to use Azure. Next is the resource group. Resource groups, as the name suggests, are groupings of resource for a specific project. If we want to create another resource for this project, we can simply put all the resources in the same resource group. So if we want to see all the resource or project X, we can simply go to resource group X and it will show up all the resources for that project. You can either create a new one or you can use a pre-selected one. I'll use the one that I already created. Next is the web application name. You can give your web app any name you want to. We'll call mine One Music Demo. That name is available. Bear in mind that this name will also be in your URL. So it would be onemusicdemo.azurewebsites.net. So keep in mind. Next, we'll select the way we want to publish the application. We'll be selecting code because we'll be deploying our code to Azure. You can use Docker container, but that's a whole different process. We'll select the runtime stack, which is Node, since our project is a Node project. Select the operating system as Linux. Next is the region. You see, Microsoft has data centers all over the world, and depending on where your primary users are, you may want to deploy your application in that specific region. Deploying an application in a region doesn't mean your application is only available to people in that region. It just means that the performance might be better for people in that region. So if I am in China, I would probably want to deploy my application somewhere in East or South Asia. Similarly, if I'm in Europe, I would probably want to deploy my application somewhere in Europe. It'll just mean a better performance for majority of your users, basically. In my case, I'm in the US, so I'll just pick Central US. Next, we'll create an app service plan. If you don't have one, you can create one, but it is basically what helps determine the cost if you go past the basic features, which in this case we won't. You can move on to the next part of creating the web application, which is monitoring, but we've already put in the basic information that we need. Click Review and Create. It'll ask us to go through our information one last time and then click Create. This will take some time to deploy, but when it's done, our app service should be up and running. Okay, the deployment is complete. We can go to the resource to see our resource that we just created. If we go over to the URL and open it in a new tab, we'll see that our application is up and running and just ready for us to deploy our code to it. When we deploy our code would be on this URL. Now we'll do the same thing and create our authentication service app service. Remember, we have two Node apps, the client React app and our Node authentication server. I'll breeze through this, but the process is pretty much the same. We just give it a different name. Okay, the next step would be to register our Auth service URL to the Spotify developer account. We went through this process in our second video, so I will just skim through it. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking our Auth server app service URL and putting it in Spotify because this is what Spotify will use to send us the authentication token during the authentication process. Okay, that step is done, and that's all we need to do on the Microsoft Azure portal and on the Spotify developer account. The next step is to open our folder that has the Auth server and the client app in VS Code. I have that right here. On the left pane here of VS Code, we have a bunch of options ranging from searching for text in all of our files to GitHub integration, running and debugging our code, Docker, and more. What we're interested in is the store. Here we can search for a bunch of plugins and extensions that we can add to our VS Code. There's a bunch of things you can add, but we're specifically looking for Azure. Searching for Azure would yield the Azure tools. There's the Azure App Service that we just created, Azure Storage, Azure Databases, and a bunch of other things. Installing these would let us push our code directly from VS Code to Azure. We would install the Azure tools. I already have it installed. But basically what it will give you is it will come with all of these options. So the Azure App Service, the Azure Database, the Azure Functions, virtual machines, and all. And you can then select which one you want to use. After installing it, you would have to log into your Microsoft Azure account. It'll go through a process where it opens a window, you log in, then when you come back here, you'll be able to see all of your resources. After doing that, this would show up here on the left pane, which is basically Azure. Clicking on this would show you your Azure subscription along with the subscriptions for other Azure app services like Function, the resource groups, the storage, and a bunch of other things. If we refresh this, we can see that the new app services that we just created show up here. We can then deploy to any of these app services with just a click of this button right here. That's the beauty of using VS Code and Azure. Before we deploy, however, we need to do a few things. We first need to specify to the app service which of our Node apps we want to deploy. If you remember, we have the Auth server, which is a Node app, and the React client app, which is also a Node app. We will do this by going to Settings, searching for App Service, Deploy Subpath, right here. In my case, I did previous deployment, so it's already set up to deploy the client first, but we'll change it to deploy the Auth server first. We'll simply replace this with Auth server. This basically says in our current home folder, deploy the Auth server Node app first. We would make sure this is populated on the user workspace as well, and that's it. Next, we'll go into the Auth server server.js file and replace the redirect and callback URLs for the Auth server to our new app service URLs. Next, we'll configure the app service to create a build of our app during deployment. The build is a production-ready version of our application that has been made to be lightweight, meaning it's really small, and it performs even better than the development version of our application. We can create a build locally by running npm build. This will create a build folder like this, right here. It has everything needed for the application to run. It basically combines our source folder and all our pages and modules into one build folder that we can simply deploy. We can specify that the build be created during deployment by adding the following settings to our app service. We go to our app service. We click on the app service that we want to deploy to, right-click on application settings and click on add new settings. We will give the name of the settings we want to add, which is listed on the screen. We will do the same thing for our client app service because we're basically deploying to both services. Now we're ready to deploy the Auth server. We simply click on the app service we want to deploy to, which is One Music Auth server demo, and click on the up arrow, which means deploy. It'll ask us which app service we want to deploy to. We click One Music Auth server demo. It'll tell you, hey, you're deploying to a new app service. Whatever you had deployed there will no longer be there. Click deploy. It's doing the deployment right now, and if we click on the output, we can basically see the logs of the deployment. It's zipping the file, creating a build, and doing everything. In a few seconds, we should be done. That's it, we're done with the deployment of the Auth server. If we navigate to a new incognito window and go to the Auth server app service login endpoint, it should redirect us to Spotify. Let's take a look. It works. Let's deploy the React client app that will use this authentication server. The process is very similar to the previous deployment we just did. We just have to replace the references of the Auth server URL in the client application and tell the app service to deploy our Node app. Let's go ahead and do that. Alright, that's done. Let's go ahead and deploy the app. Simply click on the app service we want to deploy to and click on the up arrow. It'll ask us again to verify we want to deploy to the One Music demo. We click deploy, telling us whatever we had there would probably get wiped out permanently, and that's okay. We click deploy. It then starts the deployment and shows us everything that's happening down here in the output screen. After a sec, it's done. We can test this by going to the app service endpoint. It works. Let's test the full workflow of the whole application from start to finish. I'll open up my Spotify and Apple Music account so we can transfer songs between the playlists. I have opened my Apple Music account and there is no playlist, and on the left here in my Spotify account I have a bunch of playlists. If we log into Spotify, it fetches all of our playlists from our Spotify accounts to the new account, which is awesome. That part works. Let's select a few playlists we can transfer. We'll transfer this one, and this one. We click transfer selected playlist and it asks us to log into Apple Music, which is awesome. Everything works. Let's go ahead and log in. Two-factor authentication. Okay, everything works. It says all our songs are added. So let's go back to our Apple Music account and see if it has added all the playlists. Yes, it has. It has added all the playlists. Okay. Everything works from start to finish, and there you have it, guys. The project is live for everyone to use. This is the demo, and I'll be deleting these app services and leaving the link to the proper app service down in the description below. Feel free to check it out. That's it, guys. As I stated earlier, the project is live for everyone to use. Feel free to check it out if you want to make changes. All the code is down in the description. Fork the repo and open a PR, and that should be it. A refactor to this project and an enhancement I'm thinking about is to enable people to send playlists between each other. So say I'm using Spotify and I want to send playlists to someone using Apple Music. I can simply log in, select the playlist I want to send, and the app will generate a URL that I can then send to that person. Then that person would click on that URL and it will add all the playlists in that they've selected and add it to their Apple Music account. This would require using a database of some sort and some methods to generate a URL and all that stuff, but that's the fun of software. We get to go in and figure it all out together. If you're interested in that version of the project, let me know down and I'll definitely try to do it sometime. And who says we have to do it between Spotify and Apple Music alone? We can do it between any of the music services out there. There's YouTube Music, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, and a bunch of them. All of these music services have APIs, and all we have to do is just figure out how to call their APIs and call them in the right way, and we can do everything I just did. That's it for this video and for this project for now. In the future, we'll be making further enhancements, so stay tuned and subscribe. If you have any ideas for any future projects, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll try to get to them. If you found this video entertaining or educative, feel free to subscribe as well. Stay tuned for more videos and projects. Thanks for watching and see you next time.